Are we ready to hunt some men or what?
Let's hunt some man flesh. No, I didn't like that.
Yeah. This week we watched Manhunter.
We did.
1986, the I think first big screen Hannibal Lecter movie.
Yeah.
Which I don't think a lot of people know. I'm sure 9 people out of 10 would say it was Silence of the Lambs, but this came out years earlier. And is an adaptation of the Red Dragon book by Tom Harris. Silence of the Lambs being the sequel to that. And we finally went back and watched it, Avery.
Yeah, I'd always wanted to see it. I always heard that it was a good movie in its own right, very different from all the other Hannibal media that's a little more famous and well regarded. I just always been curious, and Green Corner's time to try out some curiosity, right? So I was fully expecting a chance that it might be just completely bland and terrible, or that it might be a super underrated sleeper hidden gem, and I don't think it's either, but it was definitely fun to watch.
Yeah, this has been, I mean, you picked this. This was your pick, but this has been on my list for a long time, because I'm really interested, and I don't know what the word for it is, I guess the Hannibal verse, because I mean, I saw Silence of the Lambs many years ago and loved it. It stuck with me all these years. I've rewatched it since. I rewatched it recently, actually. And the Hannibal TV show, which we've both watched, we talked about it on our 30 Days of Night episode. I love it. I think you love it.
Yeah,
we both love that show.
Spectacular.
And I've also seen the 2002 Red Dragon adaptation. Still with Anthony Hopkins, but with Edward Norton as well. So it's the exact same adaptation as this. So I've seen a lot of Hannibal Lecter stuff. Hadn't seen this one. So I was really interested to see it just out of like, it's interesting to me to compare and contrast. Like you have different actors playing the same roles, different takes on the same story. I always find that interesting.
It is cool how different the 3 Hannibals are. And we're not going to talk about Rhys Ifans in Hannibal Rising from 2006. Just neither of us have seen that.
I haven't seen that. No, we haven't seen that. But I've heard it's okay. But like, I like the Hannibal verse. So this has been on my list for a while. Another weird thing, I have never seen a Michael Mann movie. And he's a pretty prolific Hollywood director. Like he's done a lot of big projects, and it's kind of just weird that I've dodged them all. Like Heat has been on my list for a long time.
Mine too.
The Last of the Mohicans has been on my list for a long time. Collateral, it's with Tom Cruise, one of the more recent ones, been on my list. And I've seen none of them.
Same.
So this was my first Michael Mann, which was weird seeing a director who I've never seen a movie from do a story that I know so well. It's kind of like a weird experiment almost.
Yeah, I had the same reaction when I was looking through Michael Mann's kind of career, that he's just right in there with like your, I don't know, John McTiernan's and David Lynch and like even Francis Ford Coppola, just all these guys who were just making, like pumping out movies, good, well-regarded movies. And the fact that, it's really funny, the fact that we both just dodged every single Michael Mann movie.
So if you're here to watch us compare and contrast Michael Mann films, we can't.
No.
If you're here to watch us talk about the Hannibal movies and all the different iterations, we're very well versed on that.
That we can talk about.
I think we're going to be doing a lot of, this is going to become, I think, a bit of a comparison piece of the different Hannibal Lecter iterations. Not only the character, but the stories and the overarching, ways they approached it. But that's why we picked it.
The other interesting piece that I definitely drew me to this is finding out that Hannibal was played by Brian Cox, who we both really like. Yeah. I remember we had the conversation, and mind you, before Succession was a thing, we had the conversation about whether Brian Cox could be a GOAT candidate.
Yeah, prior to Green Corner, we were just doing one of our stupid, long movie talks. Probably everyone in the room was rolling their eyes.
Yeah.
But we were talking about who is the greatest actor of all time, and it always comes up.
Daniel Day-Lewis is probably the answer.
He's
like, not him.
He's a safe pick. You're Gary Oldman's.
Yeah.
You're Machinist. Batman.
Christian Bale. Christian Bale's a pretty good pick.
He's coming up there, but we were like, it's a sleeper pick. Well, Anthony Hopkins, funny enough, would be in that list.
Definitely.
But Brian Cox, I think, is a fair shout as a much more underrated greatest of all time actor. Just one of those guys. Every time he's in something, he's the best thing or the most impressive part.
Whether it's a really mediocre movie or a really great movie.
Yeah.
He's fantastic.
He's always great. And
then Succession happens. So.
Yeah. Which really put him up in popularity even more than that. So there's a million reasons we wanted to watch this. I'm really glad we did. I guess we should get into our first thoughts.
What were your first thoughts on Manhunter, the Hunter of Men?
I don't know if this is going to surprise you or not. I loved this movie. Like, I thought I was gonna like it. I did not think this movie would be bad. Like, just there's so much kind of... But I basically knew nothing about it or what the reception was. I haven't heard anyone talk about this movie ever. I just knew it existed. And I would say that it is a fantastic movie that I would say I loved. And there's very few cons. Like, we're gonna go through it. There's not a lot of bad in this movie for me that I was able to pick out. I was riveted from beginning to end. This is a thriller.
Wow.
It's a ticking clock thriller, multiple ticking clocks, but obviously they're trying to catch a killer. And they know when his next kill is gonna be because he kills on the full moon. He's a lunar cycle killer. So there's a ticking clock element, and I was on the edge of my seat the entire movie. And I didn't want it to end. And to be honest, I'm a sucker for this genre. I really like gritty true crime stuff. Like, noir. I've watched...
It's a noir.
But like, even like, you know, like shows like Manhunter.
Yeah.
Which is funny because Manhunter. But Mindhunter, I've watched that show 2 or 3 times because I just love that gritty FBI detective story. And this is just a great example of it. So I absolutely adored it. I'll get into more specifics. But I liked it a lot more than I even thought I would. And I thought I'd like it.
I'm really happy to hear that. I did suspect you would like it a lot and possibly would like it more than I did. Well, almost certainly. Partly because this has some David Lynch fingerprints. He was attached at points. Yeah. He was attached and left the project.
I think he was the original director chosen by the producers, and then he walked away. It didn't work out, and then Michael Mann stepped in.
And anytime there's just a little Lynchian stank on there, I know that Reed's just gonna gobble it up.
Although I need to touch on that quickly because I did not get David Lynch vibes from this at all, and I'm actually similar for the same reasons as Return of the Jedi. I'm really happy David Lynch didn't direct it because because he was the set to direct that. But it's like this and that, Return of the Jedi, these are movies that I don't need Lynch to do. I love David Lynch, I love all his filmography, but I don't need him to do everything.
Sure.
And both this, Return of the Jedi, whatever else he passed over, I don't think this needed Lynch on it. I'm glad this is the final product.
But it could have turned out like Dune.
It could have turned out like Dune. So I just wanted to say that quickly.
No, that's fair. My first thoughts, I didn't like it as much as you did. I thought it was very interesting, but I found it a bit difficult for me because I found it to be a movie somewhat of contradictions, where I thought some parts of it have aged really well and some parts not as much. I thought some parts of it worked really well given the context of kind of the Anthony Hopkins and Mads Mikkelsen Hannibal characters, and some that were hindered by it. Okay. I just feel like it was a very interesting thing to watch and to dissect a little bit, but I don't know that it quite excited me in the same way, and I think I had trouble distancing myself from kind of the greater context and just appreciating it on its own as a movie as much as it deserved.
Fair enough. Yeah, and the greater context, I think, heightened it for me. So it'll be interesting once we get into that.
Yeah.
I will say this movie is dated in a way that Silence of the Lambs is not. This is very 80s. The soundtrack, the lighting, the way it's edited, it feels older. It feels like an 80s movie. I liked all of that.
Yeah.
But I can 100% appreciate that if you showed this to a modern audience with no prior background knowledge, Silence of the Lambs would be the winner. It would be something that would excite people more. It'd be more accessible.
Yeah.
I honestly believe this film is pretty much on par with Silence of the Lambs in terms of quality, but I can appreciate that it's dated a lot more and does not stand up quite in the same way.
We'll talk about it, I'm sure, but I don't know that I disagree.
Don't know that you disagree?
I think I might agree.
Okay.
I'm gonna find you, goddammit.
So let's talk...
Deep dive.
Deep dive.
Deep dive.
That's what I was gonna say.
Spoilers, as always, spoilers for the entire movie. We're gonna talk about it beginning, middle, and end. So if you want to go see this, go check it out. Spoiler warning for the whole dang thing.
Yeah, I mean...
It's from 1986, so
and
probably...
it's the same plot as an arc in the Hannibal TV show, and also the movie. 2002's Red Dragon, so if you've seen either of those, you know it. You know it. But if you haven't and you still want to see it, spoiler warning. All right, let's get into this thing. The movie opens with very creepy found footage, camera footage. Like, I felt like I was watching Sinister right out the bat. Really grainy camera, presumably of the killer filming the family he's about to kill.
Really creepy way to start the movie.
Yeah.
Set the mood. I was finding my skin was crawling right out the bat.
Yeah, big time creepy, very effective, and it really didn't overstay its welcome.
No.
Right? There's no jump scare here. It's just he walks up the stairs, turns the light on, the lady wakes up and is a little bit groggy, and that's it.
Yep.
And then
Cuts
we,
the title.
then we head to the beach.
Yeah. And we cut to the beach. Will Graham, I guess he doesn't work for the FBI anymore. He's retired from the FBI. He's a special investigator that they bring in to help catch serial killers, but he's retired because he got too close and had some bad stuff happen that we won't find out about till later, but basically as retired, lives in Florida with his family, and Jack Crawford, the FBI director, needs him back because there's this serial killer going around named the Tooth Fairy, and they can't catch him, and they've got to get Will Graham back because he's the only man that might be able to catch him before he kills again.
And what is just in a movie full of 80s energy, just the most 80s scene is, come on, you got to get out of retirement for one last job.
Yeah.
Can't do it. All right, you son of a bitch, I'm in.
Yeah, I know.
And it was just that exact scene, but it was on a really beautiful beach in Florida, which I appreciated.
If I really didn't need you to come back, I wouldn't ask.
Weird connection and aside. This is in Captiva, which is a very small island, like tiny community off the coast of Fort Myers, Florida, directly adjacent to another tiny island called Sanibel, where my grandfather bought a house in the 70s that my family still has, and I went to Sanibel like dozens of times as a child throughout my life, and we still have it in the family. And it's like not a big place, so it was really weird this was in Captiva, and I was like,
That is really weird.
anyways, beautiful beach. He's living in this like paradise, totally idyllic life, but when he sees the Polaroids of the families who've been killed,
Yeah.
he can't help himself but go back.
And again, I like the restraint shown, right? Jack Crawford doesn't show him the murder scenes, right? It's the families before.
Yes.
I thought that was a nice touch. And a lot of things about this movie, I appreciated the approach, and it's very different than you'd see today. Even in like the 2002 Red Dragon, there's just a lot of things that any movie made after about 1990 is going to do just to engage the audiences, because that's what gets the butts in seats. That's what sells the tickets and wows you and shocks you. And this movie it's just got that more old-timey kind of, you got to pay attention. It's closer to like a book.
Yeah,
I like
think
that.
If I had to put a thesis on the tone of this movie, it would be nuanced. It's like, it feels like there's some heightened sequences, but it more or less feels like it could be a real story about a police procedural. Like, it's very grounded. It doesn't sensationalize things at all.
Yeah.
And that starts out off the bat here.
If you can't look anymore, I understand.
And I say Jack Crawford, played by Dennis Farina, who is actually a former cop. I don't
Oh,
know if you
okay,
knew this.
interesting. No.
I'd seen him in a couple of things. He's around as just like Chicago mustache guy.
Yeah, I
He's
recognized him.
good role in Snatch, but I thought he was fine. I mean, when you're up against Lawrence Fishburne and Scott Glenn, I've played the other two versions of that character.
It didn't leap off. He didn't have a ton to do, anyways.
just a cop guy.
And it's William Peterson,
Yes.
who plays Will Graham.
Who was a recurring character on CSI, which I apparently...
Yeah, that's what I knew him from. Like he was like the main guy on CSI Grissom for many years.
Right.
And I think that's kind of why he'd be a household name, is that show.
And I think he was in one like James Caan movie with this director before this, Thief. And there was honestly I was surprisingly little, because I thought he was great in this.
Yeah, he's really good. It's, again, a very nuanced performance.
Yeah.
He's not going for the Oscar, but he really sells this character right off the bat.
And I thought that I was surprised. Like maybe he's been doing plays or something.
Yeah,
But he's just, I guess CSI just paid him a ton to...
He probably made bank on CSI. He's probably living in Captiva for real now.
Yeah, just owns it.
Yeah.
But
So he convinces Will to come back.
after he has sex with his wife to decide,
Yeah.
which is great.
That was a great 80s scene.
Super 80s.
The blue light, backlit sex scene. That was a very 80s moment. That was. So Will goes to, I believe the murder happened in Atlanta.
somewhere. They're kind of bouncing around the southeastern U.S.
They're all over the place. But he goes to the murder scene and he walks it alone at night, just looking through it. And the whole thing about Will Graham is he can get in the mind of a killer. He tries to empathize with them, get in their shoes, think like they think, and that's how he catches them, which is what he's doing here.
And this is one of those things that I have a hard time separating myself from the other material, because, I mean, the Hannibal TV show was just entirely about Will Graham. He's the main character, and his kind of struggle to emphasize with serial killers, but remain pure, I guess.
Insane, yeah.
Yeah. And in watching this movie, I'm wondering, like, would I have gotten that if I hadn't seen the show?
I think it did a good job establish. I was looking out for this specifically. It spends a lot more time developing it, and I don't think you really get that aspect of him until like the third act.
Yeah.
It's a slow burn. They don't let you know how much Will Graham struggles with this right off the bat. It definitely takes its time unveiling that.
I was just really curious. It wasn't that I think it did or didn't work. It's just something I can't analyze, having seen the show and the Ed Norton movie. It's like whether they did enough. And that might just be more, it's an 80s movie, you gotta pay more attention, right? They're gonna be more subtle and more nuanced, as we've said, which is fine, that's part and parcel, but if someone told me they watched this and they're like, I don't get this weird guy who's just like psychic or something, I would believe it.
Yeah, I made a note, when he's analyzing the crime scene, I really liked how methodical it is.
Yeah.
Because one of my bigger issues with the Hannibal TV show, Hugh Dancy plays Will Graham, and when he goes to a crime scene, they do this kind of big theatrical thing where he rewinds time and he relives the crime scene as the killer, where he literally acts it out. And it works it's very cinematic. I get why they did it. It's very engaging to an audience, but it also felt kind of unbelievable that he would always get it exactly right away to every minutia and every detail. I liked that this version of Will Graham stands there with a tape recorder and a slow zoom happens on him and he talks through the case. He talks it through and there's parts he can't figure out.
Yeah.
He's like, there's blood on the west wall. Don't know why yet. Can't quite figure that out.
I really like that too. And some of his big revelations are not like, I've solved everything. It's like, why was there talc on her leg? It's like, oh, I guess he took his glove off.
Yeah.
It's like a very reasonable thing for an actual cop to deduce.
It is.
And I like that.
What'd the killer do with them after they were dead?
And when he gets back to his hotel room after the scene, this was the real great acting performance from him. He's watching home videotapes of the families before the murder. The police give him these to see if it would help with the case in any way. And this is when he tries to get into the killer's mindset, and his mood totally changes. He starts talking to himself in this creepy, almost like seductive way.
I think he like jumps between like first and third person as well. He starts doing like the I feel and like,
and he starts rubbing his legs in a very weird and sensual way, given that he's watching a family tape, but you realize he's doing this to try to think like the killer. And when we see the killer later, he's pretty spot on with how the killer would watch these tapes and would act. But it's interesting because when he kind of finishes up his little spiel talking like he's the killer, he gets angry. He starts saying like, is that why you did it, you son of a bitch? Is that why you did it?
Yeah.
And I was like, that's a nice touch by him, because it almost feels like he's mad the killer made him think like that. He doesn't like going to that place.
Yeah.
It was just a lot going on. It was a very layered performance for me.
Didn't you, you son of a bitch? You touched her with your bare hands, and then you put your gloves back on.
One more thing I want to call out here is that this is not a particularly gory or scary movie. There's some moments.
Yeah.
This scene where he walks into the bedroom, I don't know why, like I honestly can't even articulate why that works so well, because obviously I've seen gory movies.
Yeah.
But him just walking into this like beautiful home, like well-kept bedroom, but just with blood everywhere.
I don't even know if I can show this on YouTube.
No.
I had the exact same reaction.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but it hit different, this blood. It felt very real.
Especially after having seen just like the nice lady, like you hadn't seen their corpses, right? It wasn't all kinds of pictures of violence. It was just them alive and happy, and then you don't even see the bodies, you just see the blood everywhere.
And you contrast that to the Hannibal show, which is very theatrical and overdone on purpose, where there's blood everywhere, and the blood almost becomes beautiful. And in this, it's like a stark procedural cop photo image of it. It's so down and dirty.
I think a lot of times throughout this movie, I kind of made the connection that it almost feels like both the Anthony Hopkins and the Mads Mikkelsen Hannibal media, it's like a movie based on this, where this is like historical.
Right.
It's like this is the real event.
This is a documentary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And these are like the super sensationalized, almost Broadway over the top versions. And there's so many little points where I felt like that, where this was just like such a normal cop version of it, but that was equally effective.
And that's why I loved it so much.
Yeah,
I love
really
that
cool.
gritty, realistic take on it. Next scene, we get into the police briefing. So they know that the killer took off their gloves at some point, so they've sent out for fingerprints. We get confirmation in this scene that they got the fingerprints back, so they're gonna run checks against that. And they've named the killer, the nickname for it, the Tooth Fairy, because he left bite marks on his victims. They obviously don't know why yet. We also get a little bit more history about Will Graham. As viewers of the show, we knew all this.
Yeah.
But the history with Will Graham is that he caught a serial killer named Garrett Jacob Hobbs, and then he caught Hannibal Lecter. Will Graham was the man who caught Hannibal, and in the process of catching Hannibal, took a near fatal injury that took him out of commission for years, which is why he retired. And we kind of get a little bit more of that background in this scene.
Commissioner was saying that you're the one who got Garrett Jacob Hobbs, and then Dr. Lecter 3 years ago.
They leave the police briefing. We're introduced to Freddie Lowndes,
Yep.
who I did not recognize as Stephen Lang. That's his name, right?
Yeah.
Stephen Lang. Stephen Lang, for everyone our generation and younger, would only know him from like Avatar.
Or Don't Breathe.
Or Don't Breathe.
Yeah.
Both of which where he played a big, buff, old military man. I had no idea, because this character is basically Troy McClure.
Well, Graham, what do you hear? What do you say? You remember me? Freddie Lowndes covered the Lecter case with the Tatler.
Oh, hi, I'm Troy McClure. You might remember me from such self-help videos as Smoke Yourself Thin and Get Confident, stupid.
Like,
Yeah.
Like 80s man with the floppy hair.
He's a Seinfeld character.
Yeah, I
he's-
had no idea it was Stephen Lang until much, much later. But he gets flipped. He tries to talk to Will Graham.
Yeah.
And Will Graham gets kind of pissed. You think it's going to be the scene of like, screw off, Freddie. He picks him up and like suplexes him under the hood of a car.
Yeah.
That was pretty good.
I guess cops could just do that in the 80s and it's fine.
Yep. 80s.
Good thing we're not doing that anymore,
Nope.
but...
So we kind of get to the moment that everyone's been waiting for.
Right.
Will Graham goes to see Hannibal Lecter. He
does.
has an incredible line that it must be the log line for the movie, where he says, "I need to recover the mindset."
I think I'll go see Lecter now.
Why?
Recover the mindset.
He says, to catch the Tooth Fairy,
I wrote that down.
I need to go see Lecter because I need to put myself back in the mindset I had when I caught him. I need to remember what it's like to feel like a serial killer, to think like them. And seeing Lecter might give me that edge so I can catch the Tooth Fairy. So he finally goes to visit him. I have to say off the bat, the thing that struck me the most is, obviously, Anthony Hopkins' Hannibal Lecter is far more famous. And the scene of Clarice going to meet him for the first time is like one of those famous movie moments.
Yeah.
But in Silence of the Lambs, that scene is so theatrical. There's the long hallway.
He's like Dracula.
Yeah, they're slowly
Yeah.
building it up. She's walking by the other cells. People are screaming. It's like a horror movie. And in this,
I ate his liver.
yeah, it's a lot more heightened.
Yeah.
In this, I was ready for the walk-up scene. I don't know why. My brain just thought they would do it as well. And Will Graham just walks into a little white room, sits down, and Hannibal Lecter's just there.
Yeah.
No frills. It's like the least heightened version of this you could do. It's so down and dirty.
And yet, I thought the character was so effective.
So good. This scene really impressed me.
So, I mean, it's understated and it feels so much more realistic than almost anything I've seen of a serial killer, of a psychopath. He's just standing there with these weird dead eyes, like not really embracing social cues. He's just rude and awkward, and he sits in like uncanny valley, which
Yeah.
I'm realizing more and more is so much scarier than the other side.
Yeah.
Anthony Hopkins is not in uncanny valley. He is
He's charming.
yeah.
But he's clearly a villain. Like
Yeah.
he kind of like relishes in being evil and like making others uncomfortable.
He's the Dracula Wolfman, over the top, wearing his cape, and
I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
whereas this Hannibal Lecter, he would fit a lot better in something like Mindhunter.
Absolutely.
That's who he reminded me the most of, was the huge guy that they have in jail in Mindhunter.
Those interview sequences,
Yeah, where he's just kind of like a somewhat normal guy, but he's just a little weird and also ate people.
Yeah, and is very upfront about what he did. And this scene is like, it's almost a normal conversation between two men. Almost. But it's not quite right. And that's where the Uncanny Valley comes in.
Yeah.
And Brian Cox kills it.
So good.
I would put this performance up to Anthony Hopkins's. It's two different takes. One is not better than the other, in my opinion.
And he got much less to do.
Way
he
less.
never even leaves the
No,
the cell.
never leaves the cell. Way less screen. Like Anthony Hopkins has very little screen time. I felt like Brian Cox had even less.
I mean, he at least takes someone's face off, and he does some stuff in that movie.
Yeah, he's got more, but Brian Cox had not a lot of screen time. He killed it. And what really impressed me about this scene was William Peterson's constraint, because he's trying to be level and get what he needs out of Hannibal, but he's holding back the emotions of someone who Hannibal almost killed him and ruined his entire life. It's probably the person he's most afraid of on the planet, and he's trying to keep it together. And I mean, jumping to the end of the scene, he keeps it relatively cool and collected. The second he leaves the cell, he sprints out of the building and like leans over a railing and like can't even see straight. And I found that so effective.
Some of the line delivery, and I love the way that they did it. They just let the horror occur naturally. Like when Hannibal just asks out of genuine concern, he's like, how's the first guy who found my basement? Is he all right? Is he emotionally damaged?
Right.
And they don't explain what that means.
And how's Officer Stewart? The one who was first to see my basement.
Stuart's fine.
Emotional problems, I hear.
They just say that, and you're like, oh.
Yeah, what did he find?
Or the other line of when he's theorizing about the Tooth Fairy, and he's just like, well, what's the yard like? Because he probably went out there, and I imagine he was nude.
Yeah,
it's just like
blood is very beautiful in the moonlight. It's good, and
it's very Mindhunter. The way that it's just a normal person talking about horrific things as opposed to a over-the-top character.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen blood in the moonlight? Well, it appears quite black.
After Will leaves, there's a pretty horrifying little segment where Hannibal Lecter gets a phone call, but hacks the phone so that he manages to get to the operator, and through a convoluted series of manipulation, gets Will's home address.
Yeah.
And we don't know why yet, but it's not good that Hannibal Lecter has figured out what Will Graham's home address is, which will come up later.
Thank you so very much.
So the next major sequence, Will goes to the other crime scene, the other family who was killed, and he wants to look into the yard. So he goes out into the backyard. He finds like a bubblegum wrapper in the woods. He basically goes way back into the woods where he can just see the house, and they have all these big windows. And he figures out that the Tooth Fairy was watching them from this tree. He climbs up the tree. There's a weird little symbol carved in the tree, and clear evidence that someone has been there staking out the house. So he figures that out at this point. Again, it's another good deduction scene where he kind of gets in the mindset of the killer.
Didn't you son of a bitch? You washed them all goddamn day long.
That's why houses with big yards.
It's the fun kind of detective work that it seems like it's just not worth it to write anymore. It seems like it's too hard for writers to be this thoughtful, and audiences don't care.
Right.
But it's just such a little thing that you just don't see, where it's just like very reasonable, follow the evidence deduction, but that's still impressive.
Yeah.
Where he's not figuring out every single detail from the gum wrapper, but he's also is discovering things that I wouldn't have thought of.
And the big revelation is that a piece of wood has been cut off the tree, and that to use it was common bolt cutters.
Yeah.
That's the big find. That's not that sexy of a movie detail, but it becomes relevant later in the movie. It's how they end up catching him. That's one of the key pieces of evidence.
Yeah.
And just watching him go through the detective process was so engaging to me, and a lot more engaging than the other iterations I've seen of Will Graham. They find a note. Dr. Chilton, who runs the prison Lecter is in, finds a note in Lecter's cell written to Hannibal Lecter by the Tooth Fairy.
Right.
So they are communicating, and they manage to find that note. But the problem is they don't want Lecter to know that they found the note, because they don't want to tip him off. So they only have the amount of time till Lecter's back in his cell to do all the forensic evidence research, which is about 4 hours.
Yeah.
Where's Lecter now?
Holding cell.
How long can you keep him in there without him getting suspicious?
3-4 hours.
So when I talk about this movie doing good ticking clocks, this is another one. They have to do all the forensics evidence on this note and get it back to its original place in Lecter's cell within the 4-hour window. And this sequence is so riveting for that reason. But yeah, then they go into all the forensic work.
And I do want to talk about the forensic scenes, but I had another note that the way that they established, I guess, the power dynamic of that scene, Hannibal doesn't even show up here. You literally don't see him throughout this entire thing. But the fact that he is a prisoner, and the prison and all the cops who caught him are terrified he's going to find out that they found out about his note. That's wild.
It is.
And the implicit storytelling just based on that is is really cool.
Like, he looms over this whole movie.
Yeah. Despite, he's on screen like 6 minutes. Like, there's stats about Anthony Hopkins in Silence of the Lambs, but this guy's in it like way less.
Yeah, and you're with the cops, you're like, they gotta get that note back.
Yeah, or else they'll find out.
Yeah.
But yeah, some of these forensic scenes, I just thought were so cool. I mean, some of the stuff they do with lighting, like there's a blue scene with the guy has the goggles on that I just thought looked so cool. This movie felt almost sci-fi, the way that it just had all these like really strong blues and pinks in some of these scenes.
The lighting throughout is one of my high points. And I'll put in some beautiful shots here, but that's a very 80s thing that held up really beautifully is the way they used lighting.
It did hold up.
And this could have been shot really flat. If you're going for that more grounded detective story, you might want it to be all grays and blues.
French Connection is like really kind of gray.
And even Manhunter, that's very gray, right? But it works for that. But this managed to make it feel grounded while still having those heightened neon 80s colors, which is really cool.
And not feeling dated visually. But I also liked the portrayals of the forensics people. And this might be just another thing that Hollywood just doesn't care about anymore. But there's even just a little line where one of them's looking through a microscope and it just says something like, "You're so sly, but so am I."
You're so sly. So am I.
Yeah.
And it's just that's his only line. And just the fact that they give like this nobody forensics guy that line, I was just like, nice.
Yeah.
I just feel like I'm on the team and we're all working together to get him.
I know. Talking about like things that typical Hollywood films don't do anymore, I love watching people who are good at their job do their job.
Yeah.
Like experts. And everyone on the forensics team, not just Will Graham, provides like really useful insight and works through the problem.
And then just leaves because they're done.
Yeah,
their job's
that's their scene. Because they figure out that the note Hannibal wrote has a book code. He's trying to communicate with the Tooth Fairy in code. And they need
personal ads,
And they need to crack it. Because when they put the personal ad goes out, they want to know what Hannibal is communicating and they need to crack the code. And it's really interesting because they think it's Bible passages, but then the one guy quickly pulls out a Bible, fingers through it, and he's like, that can't be the Bible because that book in the Bible doesn't have 6 chapters. Like, that's just a very specific detail, but I was like, that's cool. I like seeing this guy figure it out. I don't even know what this guy's name is.
It's the same with Jonah 6:8. Jonah only has 4 chapters. Lecter was not using the Bible.
They need to let the code, the message that Hannibal wrote, is going to be put into the personal ads. They figure that out through the forensics. So they need to make a decision. Are we going to let the personal ad run, or are we going to hold it back? Holding it back, Hannibal will know we're onto him, but letting it run, we don't know what he's going to communicate to the Tooth Fairy. And when they said this, I thought, oh man, I really hope it's not Will Graham's home address. And it is.
Yeah.
We don't know that yet.
And what if it encourages the Tooth Fairy to do something else beside right?
We'll all feel sick for a very long time.
But while they're kind of debating that, Will Graham has this idea that we need to bait Hannibal. We need to bait Hannibal into, we need to bait the Tooth Fairy into the open. So let's run a fake news story that'll bait the Tooth Fairy into anger and have him come after me and try to kill me, and then we'll catch him.
Right.
So they get Freddie Lounds to write a fake news piece in Tattle Crime, his newspaper, that says all kinds of stuff about the Tooth Fairy that's not true. The Tooth Fairy figured out this was a trap and didn't go for it at all.
And then we do the classic counterpunch where the Tooth Fairy immediately kidnaps Freddie Lounds.
Which is the point in the movie, I was waiting for Stephen Lang to show up.
Right.
So then the Tooth Fairy abducts him. We finally see the Tooth Fairy. He's got a scheme, like a mask on, but you can tell it's Tom Noonan. Like, I recognize the actor immediately.
And you know it's not like one of our existing characters,
Yeah.
which is all the information you needed because he's like 6'8" and really pale.
Yeah.
And
But I was like, oh, that's not Stephen Lang. Then what? And then it cut back to Freddie Lounds, and I'm like, that's Stephen Lang?
He's got the big hair, and he's all pale, and like no muscle
It
tone.
took me exactly this long to figure out Freddie Lounds was Stephen Lang.
Yeah, I saw it well after finishing the movie in the credits. I was like...
But he's been abducted by the Tooth Fairy, tied up in his house. We get a little bit of exposition about the Tooth Fairy, that he's becoming a red dragon. He doesn't go super into it.
I read that the filmmaker, Michael Mann, ended up cutting out a lot of the red dragon stuff.
Right.
He was supposed to have a full back tattoo, which Richard Armitage does in the show.
Of a dragon.
Yeah, of the red dragon. And his whole thing is like he's obsessed with William Blake's red dragon painting. And that was in the book. And then for this movie, they made the choice that I think paid off.
I think so too.
To just kind of be like, who cares? He's a crazy guy.
Like, I think the motive of what the dragon is, it's more interesting if we don't know.
Yeah.
Because it's really just like, we need to catch this guy. We don't need to romanticize his vision.
They probably found themselves having to force in a bunch of exposition where he's like sitting, is like telling someone for some reason, here's my art. It's like,
which they have time for in the Hannibal show.
Yeah, and it works.
Because they had, 6 hours to get through all this. But in this one, I think it was the right choice.
Yeah.
We do get a bit of dragon-related content, though, because he puts on his dentures.
Right.
His fake dragon teeth, I guess, and bites off Freddie Lounds's face, presumably.
Yeah.
Which is pretty graphic, and then sets him on fire and wheels him into a parking garage.
And that got me, by surprise at the very least. I had no idea. They just show this random security guard guy, or he wasn't just some random guy, just turns around, and I'm like, is he going to get kidnapped, or what's it? Oh! And it's on fire, Freddie Lounds in a wheelchair. And that, again, was in the I think it was in the show.
I think it was in the movie, Red Dragon, because Philip Seymour Hoffman plays Freddie Lounds in the movie. And I remember seeing the flaming wheelchair. I don't remember what adaptation it was,
and
maybe both.
I remember it being there, and I was still not ready for it here.
Yeah.
Here's where we get back to Will's family, right? Here's where
They crack the code, the book code. They figure out that what Hannibal told Dollarhide in the personal ads was Will Graham's address and to go there and kill them all.
Right.
So we get a pretty tense sequence where we think I certainly thought Dollarhide was going to kill them. His son wakes up his wife and is like, there's someone outside. And there's this very suspenseful sequence, and then it's the cops. They manage to beat him there. We don't even know if Dollarhide tried to kill them.
Yeah.
But the cops get there first, so Will's family is safe. But I was ready for them to die. I really thought that they might get killed in this sequence.
This is your Dexter season 4 right here. Funnily enough, apparently John Lithgow was considered for that character too.
Oh, interesting. But it kind of looks like him. After that sequence, we kind of, for the first time in the movie, are with Dollarhide. We're with his perspective. He's working at a film lab, and he has this weird relationship with one of his coworkers who is a blind woman.
Yeah.
They clearly are friends. She offers her a ride home. They have sex at his house, and there's kind of a romance there. She's not, clearly isn't aware of or doesn't care how odd he is, or maybe because she's blind, she's more blind to him being kind of a peculiar looking man. There's a lot to unpack there. Obviously, his relationship with her is very confusing. There's a sequence where he takes her to the vet to pet a tiger, which I also remember in the other adaptations. I will say, the tiger sequence I thought was actually really cool. I don't totally get it, but I found it very tense. And when I talk about, this movie does multiple layers of tension really well, someone petting a tiger is tense scene, because in a lot of movies, it's like, oh, the sedated tiger is gonna wake up and maul you.
Right.
But you're watching a woman pet a tiger being watched by a serial killer who's probably gonna kill her.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of really good, double layers of tension where you're nervous for multiple reasons, and that scene was an interesting case of that.
Yeah, the tiger it's from the book. It's two layers of symbolism in that, obviously the tiger, she's petting a tiger while she's having sex with a serial killer, but then also it's a William Blake thing, which they don't expand on. William Blake's most famous poem is about a tiger. Okay. Tiger, tiger, burning bright thing.
And William Blake did the dragon
red
painting.
Dragon painting. Okay. So this is another thing that just wasn't really developed in this movie as much, because the Tooth Fairy is obsessed with William Blake in the novel.
Right.
So that's kind of where it comes from, and I think it was once they started cutting out all the Red Dragon stuff, they're like, yeah, but we went to all the trouble to find this tiger.
Yeah. We're
going to leave it in. It was a cool scene.
Definitely. I also think that the whole sequence with Dollarhide and this woman, I can't remember her name, the character name, but...
Reba?
Yeah, Reba.
Played by Joan Allen, who was in the Bourne Identity movies, if you recognized her.
Oh, okay. I recognize, she's been in a million things, I think, but yeah, when he's with Reba, it's interesting because she's blind, obviously. So the way he looks at her, completely unfiltered, with no judgment, is very creepy. Because sometimes he's looking at her in a sexual way, like you'd look at a beautiful woman up and down. Other times he's avoiding eye contact, even though she can't see him. So it's a very, Tom Noonan does a really good job making all of the interactions with her super uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting watching it knowing that she can't see him and you're seeing his unfiltered body language. I just thought that was really clever. Obviously it's from the book, but it was well executed.
Yeah, I thought there were parts of it that were well executed. I don't know that the whole Reba thing totally added up for me. I just didn't quite get it.
I don't understand why she's into him.
She's
like, even if you can't see someone, he's still obviously very peculiar, and she's just like super cool and nice. So it seems odd to me that she'd fall for him just because she's blind. Like, that didn't quite line up.
Yeah, and the fact that she does have sex with him, but then is also kind of dating the other guy from the office just felt like weird. And
see, I don't think she was. I think he imagined that.
Okay.
And his jealousy was making him think that's what was happening.
Whatever it was, I mean, it was your kind of vulnerable damsel in distress. This was the next person who's going to be threatened, and she's a sweetheart, and like, that's fine. But as a character, and like the fact that they devote 20-30 minutes of the movie here to kind of their relationship and Dollarhide's, I don't know that it quite got there for me.
It was probably the weakest part. It's probably also the most dated part. Like the idea that this woman would fall for him when he offers really nothing is really just a little bit of a dated, stance on the relationship between men and women.
And it's just this weird, like, what's the movie about the guy with the facial deformity who falls in love with the blind girl? There's just Mask.
Okay.
Yeah, Rocky Dennis and Mask.
Right,
There's just this weird little thing of that, but it's like, am I supposed to be sympathetic to him?
Yeah.
Which I know is kind of a theme of the movie as well, but like, not really here.
Yeah, I would agree. If I had to pick a fault, this would probably be the weakest part of the movie, was the time spent with him with Reba. We get a phone call. It cuts back to Will Graham once we leave Dollarhide. Will Graham calls Lecter. So it's our final scene with Hannibal Lecter. And I really liked this phone call because Will is trying to kind of put the final pieces together to catch Hannibal. And they're both have their feet up and their shoes off and they're lounging. Like, Hannibal looks like he's just chilling. Like, he's got his feet up on the wall, and Will's in his hotel room. He's got his feet up. And it's like almost creepy that Will has reached this level of comfort with Hannibal, that they're like just two old pals catching up. They're basically twirling the phone cord without doing it, right?
Which is how Hannibal approached their first conversation, but Will didn't.
He detached.
Will was very uncomfortable in their first conversation, but by this point, he's kind of settled into, like, he found the mindset again.
He found the mindset. He's no longer detached from it. He's like one with the serial killers. And this shows how he's like completely immersed himself in their psychology again.
Which is exactly what Hannibal's trying to achieve.
Yeah.
Like
he wants Will to become like him. So Will, after his phone call with Hannibal, goes back to the original crime scene and thinks it through again. It's kind of hard to articulate what he figures out, but he's trying to figure out why there was mirrors at all the crime scenes, broken mirrors. And he figures out that Dollarhide was putting the mirrors, pieces of mirrors, in the eyes of the people he killed.
Really cool scene visually here.
Horrifying scene visually too.
Yeah.
Like, it was really creepy. So it's kind of convoluted. Again, I like that it's not cookie cutter and clean, but he basically conceptually figures out that there's something going on with optics and visuals. Obviously, the fact that Dollarhide's been with Reba, who is blind. So there's something to do with vision and image and seeing things that he figures out.
I took it as he's self-conscious about what he looks like, and that's kind of fueling his thing, which is, Buffalo Bill and Ralph Fiennes and Richard Armitage all have some element of this. And part of Buffalo Bill's character is that he's got the cleft lip. Or
Dollarhide.
Yeah. But Buffalo Bill also has the speech. So, like, I kind of got there, and it was another one of those things where I didn't think they spent enough time to fully explain it, but I also realized that I didn't want them to.
No, and when Will does finally make his revelation soon, it's not a leap. I can see how he attaches, the ideas of images and him being obsessed with pictures. Basically, at this point in the film is when Will figures it out. He's looking at the home videos again, and he puts together the piece of evidence that he was missing, which is that in the home video, the house has a padlock. But by the time the family was killed, they had removed the padlock. But they know from what they found in the tree earlier in the movie that when Dollarhide was scoping out the house and waiting to kill them, he brought bolt cutters, which means he'd been casing the house well before the actual killings, but he would have had to see the padlock from inside the house. So Will makes the big revelation that you have seen these films.
You've seen these films?
So he has them check the film company, obviously, that processed the film for both families who were murdered, and it's the same lab, which leads them directly to Dollarhide.
And there's just another little thing of contrast with modern movies that I loved, is that it's just him and Dennis Farina in a hotel room. And they don't, like, just teleport to the room where all the movies are stored, which is what you'd do now.
Yeah.
They just call and they're like, hey, go get Donnie down in the records
Yeah.
room. Ask him to check. And that's all. And it's like, that's cool.
Yeah.
I like that. And they still made it tense and a big revelation.
It was very tense, even though you kind of know where it's going.
Yeah.
You were, like, they took what could have been a really crappy dialogue scene of a revelation being said out loud can be really bad.
Yeah.
But it actually made sense. William Peterson sold it, and I found this to be very thrilling. It reminded me a lot, and I won't spoil it, but True Detective Season 1 has one of the best aha, we cracked the case moments of all time. But again, it's super grounded and gritty. They're just reviewing old case files and something finally clicks.
Yeah.
And it was the exact same thing in this. It wasn't this grand breaking of the case. It was just looking at the same evidence you've seen over and over, but spotting something new. And I really appreciated that being kind of your, climax to at least solving the mystery part.
So they do figure out that Francis Dollarhide works at this film company in like St. Louis, Missouri. They jet over there while Dollarhide has Reba in the house.
Yeah.
The scenes of Dollarhide with Reba, that was a bit of a, you didn't quite land it for me. She's there. She knows at this point that he's crazy, but she can't get away. And he's just standing there watching her. And then like once in a while comes up and like brushes her face.
Yeah, with really loud music blaring.
Yeah, it just, and even beyond the music, I just think this could have been done better.
Yeah.
This was a scene where I was like, this should be scarier than it is.
I also think it'd be scarier if you didn't see at all, because then you don't know if she's even alive. And
Yeah.
if they're racing there and you don't know if she's been killed yet, there's probably more suspense. So yeah, it was okay. I will say there's a really another weird parallel with Silence of the Lambs here, is that the big climax in Silence of the Lambs, Clarice is in the basement of his house and it's pitch black. So she can't see. She's functionally blind, and he has night vision goggles, and he's walking up to her and just almost touching her. It's exactly the same scene, except
makes me wonder if Silence of the Lambs, they like blurred a couple of books together.
it's just such a specific thing to have your damsel, not that Clarice was a damsel in distress, but to have your woman who's likely going to be killed to be blinded and just casually almost touched by the killer when they're totally unable to escape the scenario. It's just like a weird connection.
Yeah, it's weird either way, whether that was actually just in both books
Yeah.
or these two filmmakers just independently put it in.
Yeah, it doesn't really, it's kind of strange. Another weird connection, the cop who feeds them all the names, I don't know if you noticed this, the cop who feeds them all the names,
Frankie Faison.
Yeah, has been in every Hannibal Lecter adaptation in film.
Yeah.
Because he's the prison guard in Silence of the Lambs, and apparently he's also in the Red Dragon movie.
Yeah.
I can't remember.
I think he's still just
the same
prison guard.
character.
But
Yeah.
then I think in the Hannibal show, they just give him a cameo because
Right.
well, now he's been in all of it.
But he popped up, I'm like, hold on.
Yeah, and he's like not famous. Frankie Faison's like not.
Well, he's like a bunch of TV stuff.
He's like an actor.
A working character actor, but it's just hilarious that he was in both adaptations. It's just so random.
From the airport, you're a few minutes closer. We're 1025 at the Hawk Road off-ramp, Highway 94. Let's go!
The cops finally get to Dollarhide's house. So Will Graham and Jack Crawford are first there with one other cop car. The other cop car hilariously crashes for no reason.
And they throw in so they kill the lights to approach, but then one of them just like slides into some trees, and then they throw in like an 80-yard line. It's like, oh, he's really hurt. We gotta stay here.
Yeah.
I'm okay. Girl's hurt bad. I'll wait for the backup.
So it's in a position where only Will and Jack,
which was the point,
can do anything. They're in the woods, and Jack's like, wait for backup, wait for the SWAT team. But Will can see that she's in peril. Dollarhide has her on the table. He's gonna like literally stab her. So Will needs to decide to go.
To dive through the front window.
Was the craziest thing.
So I'm gonna say the next 10 minutes of this movie I loved, but just we're in the wrong movie.
I think I wrote that I both laughed and cheered.
Yeah.
My brain didn't know what to do because there's this loud music playing in the house, and it slowly crescendos as Dollarhide like thinks he sees something, and Will Graham, on beat with the music, jumps through the window.
It's like ridiculous.
And it goes so badly.
Yeah.
He gets caught. He like slaps him.
He cuts him.
He
pulls a knife. He like cuts his face
and then
up.
throws him into a fridge.
Yeah.
And he's unconscious. Like he does a horrible job. I mean, to Will's credit, if he didn't do something, she was going to die.
Yeah.
I feel like you could have just shot him through the window, though.
This whole next 10 minutes just feels like Michael Mann either, at this point in his career, just didn't want to shoot action or didn't know how.
Oh, I feel the opposite. I think he wanted a shootout. I think he's like, we got to have some... You can't just have him shooting through the window. We got to have him kill like 3 or 4 people. Because it's like... It becomes a blood... Dollarhide's walking around with a shotgun just blasting people. They go flying 10 feet away.
But they're like reusing shots. And like the editing is baffling.
There's some weird slow-mo, missing frames. It is very strange.
This looks like someone stepped on the film reel and they just had to like do their best. I honestly... We're just going to show a couple of clips here, I guess. But
yeah. I didn't find it that bad. If anything was going to be Lynchian in this movie, it'd be this part.
Yeah.
The like weird, almost surreal aspect.
And then Dollarhide gets like shot a bunch and doesn't really seem to care. And then he just like shoots a bunch of pickle jars. I don't know. It's a weird
sequence. Here. But Will Graham kills Dollarhide.
Yeah.
Nice shot of him lying down with the blood on the floor, looking like wings, like dragon wings. Little iconography there with the red dragon stuff.
There's the Simpsons episode where they're in church.
Oh yeah, that's what I knew it
that's
from.
The song, yeah. Bart puts it as a hymn in the Garden of Eden by I, Ron Butterfly.
I couldn't figure out why I knew
and
it
the organist lady plays like the 10-minute solo and then passes out.
In the Garden of Eden, honey, don't you know that I love you?
I found myself wondering, because of how weird and janky this whole shootout scene was, and don't get me wrong, thought it was fun. I'm wondering if basically they just cut to black as Will Graham's walking up to the house. Is that better? Does that make for a better movie?
Walking up to Dollarhide's house?
Yeah. Like they've figured it out. Dollarhide has Reba. Will Graham walks up, sees them, Sopranos, hard cut to black, credits. For me, like... I don't know.
I feel like that's just because you didn't like how they executed it. I don't think it would have improved the story to not see the resolution.
I thought it would have been a cool choice.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess the credence to that would be that Will keeps saying his job's just to find them.
Mm-hmm. When are you going to kill him?
I'm not. It's only my job to find him.
So I guess if you end the movie where he found him, what happens to him doesn't matter. That would kind of be in line with what Will believes his part in all of this is. I don't know. I like the resolution. We spent too much time with Dollarhide.
Mm-hmm.
Like if we'd never been with the Dollarhide perspective, maybe. But I think because we've had to ride with Dollarhide for so much of this movie, at least seeing the climax felt needed. Like to know that Reba doesn't die or die feels like something they kind of owe the audience. But
I guess I think personally I would have liked it better just because I don't know. I did not think that this last few minutes contributed to the overall effort and mood and effectiveness of the movie.
I guess to me, this movie is like a hardcore police procedural.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the mystery, solve it, and do this. And it's got all these elements that heighten that, but it is your typical, it's like the best episode of CSI ever, right? That framework, you need to show the resolution. So I guess it would have been a very artsy choice to do that, and there's movies where that would work. But because this movie was so bare bones cop procedural, I think they needed to show the solving of the murder. But this is just subjective.
It's a fair perspective, but there are, something like The Wire, right? There's like never resolutions in that.
Yeah.
And that's part of why it's so effective. And I'm sure if I was better up on 80s cop movies, I could pull up some examples where they don't get the guy necessarily, or they don't like neatly tidy everything up, and it's more effective for it. I think it would have fit.
The final sequence, Will Graham's back in Captiva, Florida with his family. Pretty on the nose, where he's helping his son hatch turtles and putting up fences to try to get as many of them to live, to make it to the water, not be eaten by like dogs.
Right.
And they're like, how many turtles made it? And I think the line is, most of them made it.
How many of them made it?
Most of them. Most of them made it.
Yeah.
And it's like, you saved her, they saved the turtles, I get it. The ending was very 80s. It's a little bit of like,
80s.
The family's on the beach, sunset, and then it literally cuts to freeze frame as the son's about to throw a rock.
Yeah.
With the music swelling. I give it a pass because this is an 80s movie, and this would be a normal ending in the 80s. It
yeah,
just
the whole
doesn't
idea
date
that you've
super
got to
well.
kind of surprise everyone with the ending every time, I feel like is not...
It's fine. It's a bit dated, but it's not like a huge issue. It's a very 80s ending, though.
Yep.
I have a question for you. We have our 3 big Hannibal Lecter performances. And Anthony Hopkins, Mads Mikkelsen, and Brian Cox. Would you be able to pick a favorite? Do you think there is a best Hannibal Lecter after finally seeing at least all 3 in something?
My favorite is Mads Mikkelsen.
Okay.
And I can say it confidently. I do think that they are attempting to do different things. All 3 of them do it.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, Anthony Hopkins is, as we've said, he's Dracula. He's a stage villain. He's crazy over the top. He's meant to draw you in and hold on him while he delivers dialogue gleefully. He's brilliant. He's manipulative. He's the best at everything and smartest at everything, right? And it works. Brian Cox is a much more... That's what a serial killer is actually
Yeah, it's
like.
a real interview with a serial killer.
He's a real guy. And I actually read a little note about this, that apparently the note that Michael Mann gave him was to act like a schoolboy.
I did see that, which I found confusing, but...
Knowing that going in, I kind of understood, because if you talk to teenagers, there is some of those mannerisms where they're just awkward and they're hiding a lot of themselves and they just don't get it yet.
And they're trying to egg you on.
I think, part of it is just if you're a sociopath, you just develop a little differently, so that's similar to someone who just hasn't developed.
Right.
So if you watch it with that eye, it's an interesting note, and I think Brian Cox nailed what he was doing. But Mads Mikkelsen is just like a demon in human form, where he's just not even a person.
He's a shark.
Yeah, he's a shark. Just completely dead-eyed, no soul, but manages. But I find him the scariest of the 3 for sure.
Certainly the scariest.
I mean, part of that being he's not in jail.
Yeah, and we also have so many more hours with him. But yeah, I would agree.
I think just in terms of if I were to sit down and watch the 3, which of these 3 is my favorite performance, my favorite villain role, I got to give it to Mads.
Yeah. I mean, I know I asked it, and I know it's a bit of a cop-out answer, but I really do feel like I could not... I think they're all pretty much equal in different fields, trying to do different things, which I think is very unique. I can't think of another character that across multiple adaptations has been consistently excellent for different reasons.
Yeah.
I literally went through what I could think of as that with different series and franchises.
Yeah.
And nothing stands up like Hannibal Lecter. It's like there's I guess not a curse, whatever the good version of a blessing.
Yeah.
That if you play Hannibal Lecter, it'll be a career-defining, incredible performance, because it's just how did they all do so well and do it so differently? That just seems like a crazy coincidence.
All right, Hollywood, go make another one and put Jai Courtney in it.
Let's
do it.
Let's see. I'll bet it would be amazing. I genuinely believe it would be amazing, because it's you can't break this curse.
All right, but let me flip it back. What was your favorite Hannibal protagonist? You had Hugh Dancy's Will Graham versus this Will Graham versus...
Clarice.
Or Julianne Moore, Clarice Starling, if you want to pull it out.
Have not seen Hannibal with Julianne Moore.
I had never heard that expression before. Oysters?
I do have to think, I think I have to give it to Clarice. Jodie Foster's Clarice. I think that movie just hinges so much on her being an expert in her field, but also having the right level of vulnerability. And it would be, I think William Peterson did an incredible job and a perfect performance for this movie to be grounded and detached and more like a real guy. But Clarice's performance is timeless. Jodie Foster is perfect in that. And when I want to compare the versions of the movie, I think this is right up there with Silence of the Lambs. I think it is pretty much at the same level of quality. But the climax of Silence of the Lambs, with her going to Buffalo Bill's house and not realizing where she is and that she's there, and Jack Crawford's going to the other house, and the doorbell rings and it opens and it's her. That is peak cinema.
Yeah.
The climax of this movie didn't even come close. No. And a lot of that is because of Jodie Foster. So I have to say she's probably my favorite protagonist of all the iterations.
I think that's probably correct.
It's probably pretty not a hot take. I think that's pretty cool.
I don't know. I mean, Hugh Dancy really does a lot with that role, but
he does.
So with these 3 protagonists, it's something that I want to commend. I know they're not. It's all 3 different creators, but this is something that a lot more franchises need to do. Is put very different people in the same situation and use that as a storytelling vessel.
Yeah.
It's something horror movies fail to do so consistently and really need to do. I think one of the best examples is with the Predator franchise. The 3 good Predator movies, right? You have the first Predator, where it's cartoonishly macho tough guys. The second one is Danny Glover, this like old, like weak, 2 days till retirement cop guy. And then Prey, where it's this like young, precocious indigenous woman, all against this same force. And I think those movies feel so different because of that.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And it's really cool. And there's so many horror franchises that need to do this and don't do it. They just cast a worse version of the same protagonist over and over again. And seeing, I mean, Hannibal Lecter, despite it being different performances, is a fairly similar antagonist, at least like none of them are tougher or smarter than Hannibal Lecter, right? They're all kind of running into this same overwhelming force.
Yeah.
And like of personality and literally like the threat they're being put under. But watching these 3 characters come at it so differently and react so differently and the value they bring being so different.
Most serial killers keep some sort of trophies from their victims.
I didn't.
No. No, you ate yours.
Well, we've been talking for a very long time about Manhunter. It's probably about time we get into our scoring.
Why don't you tell me your critical review for the movie Manhunter?
My critical score for Manhunter is going to be an A.
An A?
I'm going to give it an A. I dabbled with A- for a couple of the aspects about it being dated.
Okay.
Because I thought at the end, what is the only bad thing, what is something bad about this movie? I was really happy with this movie when I finished it, obviously. And I was like, but if I had to be critical, what would I criticize? And all of them were things that would fall under dated.
Right.
Music choices, some of them being odd. Some of the editing in certain scenes I found a little peculiar, but again, it's in line with films coming out of this time. So everything that I could say is negative was unique to the 80s. If I remove that, I literally don't have a complaint about this, except for maybe the climax not being exactly how I would have wanted to play out. But again, that's kind of just dated.
Yeah.
So with that being said, I'm giving it a pass on things I consider dated. I just think this is like an expertly crafted movie. It's definitely my favorite movie I've watched in 2024. I mean, it's only February, but I haven't watched that many movies this year yet, but it's like, I have not been this excited and engaged by a movie yet, anything this year. So I really liked it. For my personal, I'm gonna go A as well.
Okay.
I did think about A+, I'm not gonna lie to you. I thought about it.
Wow.
Only because I recognize I probably do like this more than it is good. Because I have the Hannibal connection, I specifically love the genre, but I just couldn't quite put this in the holy grail of movies. Like, I don't have any issues with this movie. I think it's a damn near flawless police procedural movie. That doesn't mean you get A+ necessarily. I think A+ are like my top 10 movies of all time. This is kind of on the tier below that. So
if I'm immediately able to say like it's not close to Lord of the Rings, then it's not an A+.
Yeah, it's not up there with my Bone Tomahawks, my The Shinings, my Wind Rivers, these movies that I will watch forever.
Wind River.
Yeah, so it's not an A+. I'm just going to keep it an A, both critical and personal. This was a slam dunk movie, one that I'm really happy I watched.
I'm thrilled that you liked it that much. I mean, I'm really happy, and I think that it's totally fair. I agree with all your points. I definitely didn't like it as much as you're saying. I don't think it was quite as strong, whereas I agree that it was really tightly crafted, and there wasn't many things that I could call mistakes. I think I was looking for more kind of high highs. I mean, you mentioned Wind River, and there's a couple of, despite Wind River being extremely well crafted, there's a couple of moments in Wind River that just kind of rise above, like the whole standoff scene.
Yeah.
And then I think, I mean, you've talked about the ending of Silence of the Lambs, I think is another point, as well as some of the over-the-top kind of gore stuff with Anthony Hopkins escaping. For me, this movie just didn't really have those moments. Like, I don't know what moment other than Brian Cox's performance that I can point to in this movie as like, that's like the thing about this movie.
This movie's more level.
Yeah, it's more level.
Yeah.
And because of that, I'm going to give it a B+ for my critical review.
Sure.
And I think that's me really trying to look at it as its own movie, separate from, I guess, the Hannibal verse and my other experiences. Looking at it just as, you know, an 80s cop procedural with a couple of really cool performances, as well as being kind of unique in its approach to serial killers, which is something that's been done a lot since, but wasn't done a lot then. And then also in terms of serial killer movies, I mean, I don't like Silence of the Lambs or Seven or Zodiac as much, but even then I would definitely put those critically above this movie, so I gotta knock it back a little bit. But I think B+.
Sure.
And then personally, it is gonna go a little bit lower. This is gonna be a B- for me personally. I wasn't riveted the way you're describing. I think that a couple of the scenes of kind of figuring out clues and exposition, I did kind of tune out a little bit. Enough that it brought it back, and I just don't think that this style resonates with me as much as it did with you. And I mean, even some of the movies I just listed, like Silence of the Lambs and Zodiac and Seven, and I would put those lower than most people would. I don't even think any of those are an A- for me personally. I think those are probably all well in the Bs, which I recognize that's not the opinion a lot of people would take.
Because you hate crime.
It's because I hate crime. I have so much justice in my heart. Can't stand seeing these dirty criminals. No. But yeah, I don't think it's a C, even for me personally. I mean, I did enjoy it, and I respect a lot of the craft that went into it, but that's about where I'm at. But now,
MVPs.
Time to talk about our most valuable part of the movie, which is what P stands for.
This was not really a very hard one for me this week. It's going to be Michael Mann, both the writer and director. I mean, technically Tom Harris is credited as writer because it's based on his book, but Michael Mann did write the screenplay. He wrote all the lines in the script. I think this movie is so tightly put together. It looks amazing. The script, for me, drives the entire way. There was no low point for me in the movie. I was constantly being like, what's going to come next? What are they going to find out? And to do that with a movie that is pretty dry into actual material, it's a lot of just people doing forensic evidence and looking at stuff and talking. For it to be so engaging means that it was visually striking and like looked really interesting, even when things are kind of blasé technically, like what's happening on screen, they spice it up by shooting it really interesting ways. And then the script is just really tight. And all the performances are good. There's lots of great work done on this movie by everyone else involved. But like I said, you could take out Brian Cox as Hannibal Lecter, just remove the scenes of Hannibal Lecter, and the movie still would have been good. He was the cherry on top. He elevated up to greatness, but he was not required for this to be a good movie. William Peterson did a great job as Will Graham. There's probably a dozen actors that could have done that role well enough that I still would have really liked this movie. But if it wasn't this well directed or the script was not this tight, I think this movie could have not worked. So he is the most pivotal part of it being a great movie, whereas all the other parts I could see being swapped out for other things. And the movie's still working to some level.
Well, I mean, I don't know that I completely agree on the heights of every part of the movie, but my MVP is based on the one where I do. I'm picking Dante Spinotti, who's the director of photography, because, this movie is a feast. And it simultaneously is very 80s, but does not feel dated to me, even as someone who doesn't watch a lot of 80s stuff.
Yeah.
All the blues and pinks and it looks very 80s knowing that context, but if you just released it now and said this is just a heavily stylized movie that uses a lot of color, I don't think that would be crazy.
Yeah.
And I don't think I would be like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
If you remove the whole context of it being an 80s movie. And I completely agree that there's a lot of scenes that are very much elevated by how cool they look.
Yeah.
And so I think that's probably the person that I think would have hurt the movie most by, being just a replacement level of guy.
Good job, Dante Spinotti. All right, well, thank you so much for hanging out with us today. We appreciate you all supporting the channel. We just recently hit 500 subscribers, which is small fish in the YouTube ocean, but a big deal for us. We really appreciate all your support in getting there. We do have a Patreon now. All our videos are up there, and our free Patreon exclusive for our Hell House 2 deep dives. If you want to see that, it's up now. You can go watch it. The links are going to be down below. It's fun. And
I want you guys to know that we read each and every one of your comments. We love reading them.
It's true.
Love hearing from you, whether it's about this movie, other movies you want us to cover, similar movies, stuff. Probably my favorite comments is stuff that we didn't think of. We get some really thoughtful little comments or notes about themes or connections that we miss, because every once in a while we may miss one or two things. So please continue to give us your thoughts on each and every one of these videos on YouTube or over on Patreon, because We are not big enough that we're missing comments. We
No.
are definitely reading them all.
We read them all.